What do you do when you're sent thousands of miles away to face an unseen enemy who knows the terrain, the people, and your every move? Long before the shots fired at Long Tan, the battle for Vietnam was already being waged in whispers, on maps, and in the mud beneath our boots. But could a small group of Australians outsmart an enemy that had thrived in the shadows for years? As Brigadier Chamberlain notes, both the Viet Cong and their earlier counterparts, the Viet Minh, had established a strong foothold in Phuoc Tuy long before we arrived. By May 1966, when the first Australian task force began setting up a significant base at Nui Dat, we found ourselves at a substantial disadvantage in local knowledge. The Viet Cong were well acquainted with the land and the people of Phuoc Tuy. They held influence over the locals and were part of the community, while we were merely outsiders. Most of us didn't speak Vietnamese, and at some point, we would have to leave. The critical question lingered: who would take charge in our absence, the Viet Cong or the Saigon-based government of the Republic of Vietnam? We believed that for Australia to succeed, a long-term military commitment in Vietnam was essential. The costs had to be palatable to the Australian public for however long it took to see this effort bear fruit. Early victories, deemed significant by both the Australian government and its people, were crucial, and we needed to settle into Phuoc Tuy without incurring heavy losses. Having endured a lengthy conflict with the French just 12 years prior to our arrival, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese leaders had learned valuable lessons from their own costly experiences. They understood the importance of appearing to deny their enemies any early wins while inflicting heavy casualties, even if it meant suffering losses of their own. Upon our arrival, the first task for the Viet Cong forces in Phuoc Tuy was to assess our strength. How robust were we at Nui Dat and in Vung Tau? How well equipped were we? How fortified were our defenses? How dependent were we on American support? What were our operational capabilities? Did we grasp the intricacies of counterinsurgency warfare in Southeast Asia? How effective were we in conventional military operations? Would we falter under direct attack? Were we ambushed and rendered ineffective by relatively moderate local forces like the district companies and D-45 Battalion? These were pressing questions the Viet Cong needed to resolve quickly. From the moment we arrived in Phuoc Tuy, we faced a period of being observed, inspected, tested, and evaluated by the enemy. Luckily, we had the support of the U.S. 173 Airborne Brigade, but it was clear that local Viet Cong units were already on the move, probing our defenses since Operation Hardihood began on the 24th of May, 1966. We could see from their numbers, weapons, and uniforms that these local units were just light forces. Yet, we knew stronger forces were at their disposal, including Regiments 274 and 275, totaling over 3,000 troops, capable of delivering significant blows against us. Once the 173 Airborne Brigade left Phuoc Tuy, our challenges would truly begin. As Brigadier Chamberlain noted, in June, the stronger of the two main force Viet Cong regiments, 274 Regiment, moved in close to assess our position. They may have been inclined to attack if they believed they could strike a heavy blow, but perhaps out of caution, they opted not to launch a major assault in June or July. Instead, they set an ambush for us near a recently crashed U.S. aircraft. Throughout June and July, our perimeter at Nui Dat faced probing by small Viet Cong patrols at night. When they felt they had gauged our capabilities, they launched a significant attack on 17th of August with a large force, including 275 Regiment and D-445 Provincial Mobile Battalion. We were fortunate that the Viet Cong revealed their presence through premature mortar, light artillery, and recoilless rifle fire aimed at the task force base on that day. The following day, 275 Regiment encountered a relatively strong Australian response from D Company of the 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, our sister battalion. In a fierce engagement on the afternoon of 18th of August, just north of the village of Long Tan, we managed to contain the Viet Cong assault. D Company was reinforced later that day, held its ground, and dealt heavy losses to 275 Regiment, with 245 confirmed dead and several hundred more wounded. These losses compelled their commander to retreat and withdraw his forces from the battlefield. Continuing patrols by a joint Australian-US forces found that the Viet Cong had completely pulled back from the eastern approaches to Nui Dat. The 5th Battalion, RAR, played a role in clearing eastern Phuoc Tuy, moving 8 kilometers east of Binh Ba, then another 8 kilometers south, before heading back to Nui Dat, which was another 8 kilometers to the northwest. Over 5 days, the battalion covered more than 40 kilometers on foot, meticulously searching through the jungle, digging defenses to guard against any night attacks by the Viet Cong, and sending out small reconnaissance teams to monitor any continued enemy movement near the base. The wet season made this searching more challenging. Around 2 p.m. most afternoons, dark clouds would loom overhead, quickly unleashing heavy rain that soaked our clothing and gear, turning the ground into a muddy mess. Several days and nights in those conditions led to muscle aches, skin issues, and accumulating fatigue. The Viet Cong faced similar challenges. While their local resources and knowledge might have given them some relief compared to us, everyone involved in this conflict had to find ways to endure the relentless rain, physical exhaustion, and mental strain. While the 275 Regiment focused on its mission against Nui Dat in mid-August, the 274 Regiment was active in western Phuoc Tuy, trying to block the Americans' use of Route 15 by taking control of defended villages along the highway. Phu Mai saw multiple attacks in August 1966, with signals intelligence revealing that the commander of the 274 Regiment, along with local Viet Cong units and D-445 Battalion, was intent on closing the road to the South Vietnamese government and its allies. This information was particularly concerning for General Westmoreland and his senior intelligence and operations advisors. To strengthen the U.S. position around major bases like Bearcat, Bien Hoa, Long Binh, and Saigon, they needed to move troops along Route 15. It's hard to gauge how much the Viet Cong understood of the American strategy, but their increased activity in western Phuoc Tuy, especially around Route 15, suggested that they had gathered valuable intelligence, analyzed Westmoreland's priorities, and were prepared to take significant action to counter his plans. The interest in controlling Route 15 was a key reason for deploying the 1 ATF into Phuoc Tuy, aimed at preventing the Viet Cong from taking over the road. Throughout much of September, the task force was split, with 6 RR performing clearing operations in the Nui Din Hills, while 5 RR handled additional clearing and defensive tasks around Binh Ba and the district headquarters at Duc Thang. In early October, the Americans planned to reinforce their position around Bien Hoa and Saigon by moving a brigade of troops by road from Vung Tau to Bearcat. General Westmoreland made it clear to Brigadier Jackson that the Viet Cong had to be pushed back from the high ground along Route 15. Considering the Viet Cong's strength and locations, along with General Westmoreland's strategies, I had my work cut out for me as the battalion intelligence officer for the next 3 months. I had initially served as the second-in-command of B Company, but on August 6th, our intelligence officer, Captain Don Wilcox, was reassigned to a vacancy at Task Force headquarters. Colonel War appointed me to take over from Don, presenting a significant challenge that also provided me with a fascinating perspective on the war, our enemies and allies, and especially the Vietnamese people whose support was crucial. The main source of intelligence for understanding the overall situation was the American Corps-sized headquarters, 2 Field Force Vietnam, located at Long Binh, near Bien Hoa. They were able to inform us, even before we departed for Australia, about who our main military opponents were and their past records. The American intelligence teams also shared insights into the political support the Viet Cong had established in various villages and towns of Phuoc Tuy. However, there were 2 issues with this information. First, it often lagged behind the current events. Every week I received a detailed intelligence summary that resembled a telephone directory, but it was usually 1 or 2 weeks outdated by the time it reached me. As a result, it was often not particularly useful for planning upcoming operations. Second, the information and analysis from the Americans were more effective at the higher levels of the Viet Cong than at the lower levels. We could talk about the Viet Cong Main Force Command and its members, but our focus didn't really extend to the types of forces we often encountered, like the provincial mobile battalions and district guerrilla companies. This mix of strengths and weaknesses stemmed in part from the Americans' heavy reliance on signals intelligence. From our position in Phuoc Tuy, it was up to us to fill in those gaps, especially to better understand the political landscape in the populated areas. Despite this, the framework given to us by 2FFV was incredibly useful. I managed to overcome the delays in communication by visiting HQ2FFV in person, with help from the Australian liaison officer, Major Bert Cassidy, who had previously commanded A Company 5RR. Typically, a U.S. battalion intelligence officer wouldn't have been allowed inside, but being Australian piqued the Americans' curiosity. Because I showed up at their doorstep, they'd share insights I wouldn't have received for a week or two through official channels. One of the first lessons I learned in intelligence work was that if people like you, they'll share information. A second lesson was that even with the best intentions, what they tell you isn't always accurate. It's a buyer beware situation. We built our intelligence picture mainly through our own efforts: patrols, village searches, my frequent visits to important villages, and occasionally stationing small groups of our troops in villages for a few days. One of our most valuable resources was the anti-tank platoon, soon to be renamed the reconnaissance platoon, led by Second Lieutenant Michael von Berg, known as Mick Deek. He had all the right traits for leading this unit. He was smart, curious, and brave. He received a military cross for his actions at Nui Thi Vai in October 1966, and he had an exceptional ability to connect warmly, often without needing an interpreter, with the Vietnamese villagers. He was truly the ideal counterinsurgent, and much of my success as an intelligence officer relied on the information he consistently provided from his platoon's operations. We implemented a new approach, introduced by our commanding officer, Colonel War, to better utilize our anti-tank platoon, which had been formed during the Cold War. Given that the Viet Cong didn't have tanks in our area, we had a small team tasked with special operations like intelligence gathering and ambushing Viet Cong patrols deep in the jungle. The members of this platoon were carefully chosen and received specialized training. In fact, all our platoons and companies engaged in intelligence gathering while on patrol, relying on stealth and keen observation to operate effectively. Another crucial resource for us was the local population. We had to tread cautiously to build reliable and secure connections with the Vietnamese villagers. Initially, we were unsure of how strong their support for the Viet Cong truly was. We took personal risks to establish contact in a friendly and non-threatening manner, being careful not to publicly identify any Viet Cong opponents by paying too much attention to them. This caution was especially important for village priests and anyone affiliated with local government, as they often preferred to come visit us at Nui Dat. In doing so, we accepted the risk that they might be conducting an intelligence mission on behalf of the Viet Cong within our perimeter. We mitigated these risks by proceeding slowly and verifying the quality and reliability of the information we acquired. We quickly learned that many villages were divided in their loyalties. Some leaned toward the Viet Cong, while others favored a more liberal government. Few supported the Saigon government, which they viewed as distant, often corrupt, and unconcerned about critical issues affecting peasant farmers, like land ownership reform. They thought there were too many inadequately trained individuals within the Saigon government. The local Vietnamese desired leaders who connected with their constituents, not a cadre of generals accustomed to ruling through orders rather than earning public support. This division in local opinion presented unique challenges for gathering information. From the Viet Cong supporters, we received nothing but misinformation. Others provided us with information that, while flattering to our egos, was ultimately misleading and potentially dangerous to act upon. Through trial and error, we learned whom to trust and who to listen to. Yet we kept engaging with anyone willing to talk to, safeguard our most important sources. Over time, we became more attuned to where the truth resided. Being Australian provided us an advantage in this scenario. Many villagers were wary of Americans, having heard about tanks rolling through rice fields and the destruction of homes and resources. They recognized us as not American due to our different uniforms and equipment. Some even mistook us for the French, thinking we were here to reinstate colonial rule, but that notion faded quickly once they heard our accents. We were fortunate to build strong relationships with numerous villages because our soldiers were approachable and friendly, and we made good use of our sense of humor, which easily transcended cultural boundaries. Most importantly, our company commanders and Major Max Carroll, our operations officer, had prior experience in the Malayan emergency. They had successfully implemented the British's more refined techniques in a rapidly deteriorating situation. They understood how Southeast Asian villages operated, what the local people's worries and needs were, and the critical importance of their limited resources, like rice fields and fruit trees. Captain Peter Isaacs, our adjutant with a British Army background, significantly contributed to our planning discussions. Our medical officer, Captain Tony White, was another vital part of our outreach efforts. With his small team, he spent countless hours consulting with villagers about their health issues. After searching a village, we would provide some compensation for the inconveniences we caused, handing out clothing which sometimes led to humorous moments, as elderly men tried to fit into bright floral dresses meant for women. Despite these blunders and the occasional inconveniences we caused, most villagers realized that, overall, we were there with good intentions, eager to be friendly. Like them, I wished for a better future for everyone in Phuoc Tuy once we moved on. From my role as the battalion's intelligence officer, it was a tough task to navigate through the often conflicting information provided by the villagers. Occasionally, the details we received were intentionally twisted by Viet Cong sympathizers, and at other times, they were outdated or simply based on rumors. I had to determine what was inaccurate and what was reliable and beneficial. It was helpful to discuss findings with our officers and non-commissioned officers who had experience from the Malayan emergency. They could sometimes differentiate the essential information better than I could. Another key contributor to strengthening our intelligence network was our commanding officer, Colonel War. Although he hadn't served in Malaya, he had sustained serious wounds in the Korean War, which offered him valuable perspectives on modern warfare. He was highly intelligent and approachable with his subordinates, much like a supportive doctoral advisor in a graduate school. Almost every day, he would meet with me to discuss the Viet Cong, what actions they were taking, their strength, their locations, and what their commanders might be planning in the coming weeks. "Bob, what have you got for me?" was his usual opening line. I would summarize my insights on those topics. "Yes, you might think that, but what about?" He would often counter, and that's when our serious discussion would start. He would challenge my ideas and theories, probing them where they were weak. Sometimes, he would send me back to gather more information on specific matters or request an in-depth analysis of a particular issue related to our methods and their effectiveness. Without his deep interest in and understanding of intelligence matters during that war, we likely would have faced heavier casualties and made less of an impact on the Viet Cong than we did in 1966-67. It wasn't surprising when the University of New South Wales appointed him as Deputy Registrar a few years later. Supporting me were the members of the Battalion Intelligence Section, about 5 or 6 soldiers led by Sergeant Ernie Madden, who consistently collected, documented, and organized all the intelligence flowing in from various sources. They kept me informed and prepared. With that information, we created detailed maps highlighting enemy movements which were used to brief platoons and companies heading out on patrol. They crafted precise three-dimensional models of the terrain the battalion would navigate in upcoming operations, allowing me to brief the company commanders as part of the orders before we deployed. During our operations, I would stay close to the CO and the operations officer, while my section back at Nui Dat kept me informed about any new intelligence, particularly from signals analysis, and figured out a secure way to relay that information to me. Since the Viet Cong monitored our radio communications as well, delivering information in hard copy on foot was usually the most effective method. As one of the 2 battalions that comprised 1 ATF, 5 RAR's activities were part of a larger operational framework. The task force commander, Brigadier David Jackson, granted significant freedom to his two battalion commanders in planning and executing their missions. Still, these plans were made in collaboration with Task Force headquarters and were supported by all the resources of the task force, including its small intelligence staff, led by Major Alex Piper. While this team couldn't conduct its own intelligence operations, it served as a crucial hub in the system by analyzing and distributing information from Viet Cong and North Vietnamese radio traffic. My regular interactions with Alex Piper and his assistant, Captain Don Wilcox, who had previously served as 5RR's intelligence officer, were vital, and I communicated with them nearly every day to receive and share intelligence updates. For an illustration of how our intelligence system functioned, consider Operation Queen Bayan in the Nui Din Hills from October 17 to 26, 1966. Our first task was to determine the size and locations of the Viet Cong forces in the hills. Our patrols quickly came across groups of up to 40 men, likely well-equipped main force soldiers, on the slopes of Nui Thi Vai. On October 8th, Alex Piper took a helicopter to brief us. He informed us that a higher enemy group on Nui Thi Vai was led by the deputy commander of the 274 Regiment, which was the better of the two main force regiments we were up against. They had established a strong defensive position in the rocks and caves above us, and if we launched an attack without proper preparation, we would be at a disadvantage. The outcome could have resulted in significant Australian casualties. We hadn't anticipated encountering such a large Viet Cong force, along with all the supporting facilities, indicative of a regimental presence in the area. After launching airstrikes, sending in helicopter gunships, and employing artillery and mortar fire against a considerable enemy, we received orders to retreat closer to Route 15 to hinder the Viet Cong from establishing ambush points along the road. Once the American reinforcement convoys made their way through, we focused entirely on driving the 274 Regiment off the hills. Regular visits from Brigadier Jackson and Major Piper kept us updated on the signals intelligence regarding Viet Cong activities in the hills. Over the 10 days from October 17th to 26, we fought our way back up the steep slopes, facing several Viet Cong delaying groups hidden in caves, tunnels, and rocky outcrops. We uncovered extensive base facilities and equipment, including a recently manufactured Chinese radio transmitter and receiver, as well as the diary of the deputy commander, Nguyen Nam Hung. This diary likely became our most crucial intelligence find of the entire year. He began each daily entry with his current location, allowing us to map out his movements over the first 10 months of 1966. Following the translation of the diary, I spent much of the next 3 months extracting all the intelligence it held. The value of the diary was further enhanced by another discovery, a marked 1/50,000th scale map of western Phuoc Tuy that displayed the complete Viet Cong track system and the locations of base camps and fortified areas. This map enabled us to strategize reconnaissance and ambush missions for the months ahead. In essence, this operation succeeded because we had developed a detailed understanding of Viet Cong activities along Route 15 before we began. While we didn't initially grasp the full size of the enemy group on Nui Thi Vai, U.S. and Australian signals intelligence soon provided the critical information we needed. As we moved forward with the final clearing attacks on the Viet Cong positions, we uncovered additional useful findings that reinforced our intelligence framework for the rest of our time in Vietnam. One challenge that most intelligence officers encounter when working with operational commanders is that the latter can often have preconceived notions in their minds. A favored way of conducting operations often drove their approach, with a search for intelligence to support that choice. I stumbled upon this topic through an unexpected personal connection. Shortly after the 5th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment arrived in Vietnam, my first book, The German Army and the Nazi Party, was released in London by Kessels. Not long after, I got a message from my production manager, Ken Parker, telling me that they were also publishing a book on the German bombing campaign in World War I, titled The First Battle of Britain by Raymond Fredette. Parker noted that Fredette was a major in the U.S. Air Force and currently stationed in Saigon at the headquarters of the U.S. Military Assistance Command, or MASCV, led by General Westmoreland. Fredette soon invited me to visit him in Saigon. We discovered many mutual interests, leading to a developing friendship and more visits. Our bond has grown, and even now at 95, Ray and I keep in touch regularly. A significant insight for this chapter came from Ray regarding the workings of the top U.S. headquarters in Vietnam. There was a wide range of opinions among senior leaders on how to achieve victory, from advocating total destruction of South Vietnam to pushing for large-scale civic action that prioritized education over military efforts. Each viewpoint sought intelligence to validate its effectiveness while downplaying or disregarding information that supported alternative strategies. This dynamic affected the intelligence team, the J2 division of MATV, which had its own theories about winning the war, influencing what they communicated to the J3 operations division. Ray explained that this rivalry between J2 and J3 wasn't confined to MACV. It permeated throughout the U.S. forces in Vietnam. After Ray shared this analysis, it became clear that these patterns were relevant even for our smaller Australian forces. Commanders could cherry-pick intelligence to support their favored strategic or tactical choices, instead of weighing all available options. These were valuable lessons for shaping our operations in Vietnam. I wanted to understand why some notable commanders in history clung to failed strategies, even when intelligence at the time contradicted their grand plans. Luckily, at 5RR Battalion headquarters, we had a commanding officer and key officers who recognized the dangers of a rigid strategic mindset. They insisted on comprehensive intelligence briefings instead of just summaries of what I deemed important. This expert debate group established and upheld the standards for our intelligence gathering and analysis throughout our time in Vietnam. The operations in October 1966 provided valuable lessons on merging intelligence with operational planning. These insights have remained significant and continue to influence methods still in use today.